Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Slice of the Reef, our new podcast that demystifies the art of saltwater fish keeping. My name is Billy.
And I'm Giancarlo, aka Banana or Fishy Fish. We're going to be your guides today into the amazing world beneath the waves, but also in the box in your living room. Crazy, huh?
Enjoy and easy reefing.
Alright guys, welcome to today's episode of Slice of the Reef. Today's episode, we are going to be diving on top 5 investments that can go into starting a tank. And these don't just apply to reef tanks. You can apply these to mostly anything.
Our first one on the list is a 401k. Just invest in that.
Straight through, Roth IRA, pull that shit, put it into a reef tank. Unless you're investing your entire yearly salary and a half into a tank, you're not properly aquariuming.
No, you take the money that you would spend on a reef tank and you spend it on a 401k and you're a millionaire in 20 years.
You don't need a 401k if you have a reef tank.
I have one. Yeah, good. All right, so that's our topic for today, but first we're going to talk about our schedule and then give you guys an update on how our individual tanks are doing because you're so interested in hearing that. So our schedule, typically, today's an atypical day, but we record episodes live in our Discord server on Tuesdays at noon Pacific, 2 p.m. Central. That Discord server is discord.gg/aquatica. We also do a live Q&A at the end of every episode. Those questions are sourced from our members, hi members, and typically, unless we have some tech issues, we'll have a new episode published on podcatcher apps every Friday. But again, that'll vary depending on our availability. So that's our schedule. How's your tank doing, Banana? Any big impulse purchases lately?
Yeah, so last week I impulse purchased a sump. Well, it's not really an impulse purchase, okay? I've been looking to or thinking of upgrading a sump, and I recently bought a 6-foot Bashia Pro Series 60 because the old one that I had was a 40 gallon and it was too small for my tank. Whenever I turn off the overflow or whenever I turn off the return pump, the entire sump would flood almost to the top, and it was just no good because you'd have Cheeto and you'd have macroalgae swimming over the skimmer area, and then there's no point in the sump. It's basically serving as one giant tank.
Oh, real quick, is that how you pronounce Kato?
We're gonna go back and forth on it. I call it Cheeto.
Wow, that's a dumb way to say it. I say Kato because that's Latin. That's how Latin works.
Kato.
But it's okay. You'll learn. It's okay.
I wish I knew Latin. Yeah. So
So your problem was that you designed your sump poorly, and so you decided to spend thousands of dollars on a pre-made one.
I didn't design the sump poorly. Trigger designed the sump poorly. I purchased. Yeah, it was a Trigger sump.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a solid sump. It was a solid sump, but the thing I don't like is they make the sock holder small enough where you can't put a roller mat on top of it, and I was at the point where I'm replacing filter socks once a week. Otherwise, the entire thing would just like flood over. It was so annoying to deal with that. Then, because I had some funds over because I took down the frag tank, I took down the quarantine tank, I sold a bunch of equipment, and I was like, hey, might as well put it back into the tank. Since I kind of made like the rule with myself a while ago that all the money I got from the tank would go back into the tank, and paying for the electricity and all that. I try not to use the tank as a source of income. I don't want to capitalize on it as much as possible. I mean, it's definitely doable, but that's not the route that I want to take with it. I want it to be a hobby first, and then, if I make money on the side, I make money on the side. So I use the funds from the two.
A really great way to justify a downward spiral into your reef tank.
Yeah.
So be careful.
Yeah.
Don't be like bananas.
So yeah, I recovered from that. I finally recovered from that. I took advantage of the show sale that they were having, and then right after that came the Memorial Day sale, which was this weekend, yesterday, and then it was a fair discount. I got about $300 to $400 off, and then with Premium Aquatics, I used the sign-up code, and I got another 10% off, and then using that, I ended up getting the sump and the reef mat for it, and they kind of came out to what I spent on what I sold from the sump, or from the frag tank. And then, once I recovered from that irresponsible financial decision, just yesterday, I made another irresponsible financial decision, and I bought 2 new MP60s, so... I'm a broke boy, and I'll always be a broke boy. But yeah, that's what my tanks do.
The funds that you've gotten from your reef tank are now back to zero, so you're just in the black. You're not like...
It comes from the tank, it goes back into the tank, right? How about you, Billy? How's your tank doing?
My tank is doing good. I think since we last recorded, had I added the clownfish?
No, you haven't. You hadn't.
Okay. So I got a captive bred Onyx, Picasso, Percula, the Sequest line, which is like a really healthy, solid, robust line of captive bred clownfish, more so than most. And I added it. I got a really big one, special ordered from my LFS, and I paired it up with the tiny little true Percula that was already in my anemone tank. But the weird thing is the big one doesn't seem to want to host the anemone. So she just hovers up above the anemone and watches people. So that's doing really well. My main tank, my two big Monties, well, my two smaller big Monties, have met each other and they're currently fighting. So I'm hoping that
Monty Warfare.
Yeah, I thought they were, because they were digis, they wouldn't fight, but I'm wrong. Or something else is pissing them off. I don't know.
Which one do you want to win?
The bubblegum.
Bubblegum? You want the bubblegum one?
It's a bubblegum versus a green digitata with a blue base.
Screw that.
And the green is really fluffy and beautiful, but I have enough green I don't really need. But they shouldn't kill each other. Like, there shouldn't be a casualty, I don't think.
Not full casualty, but you're always going to have tips that die off. One's got to win. One's always got to win.
Whichever one grows faster. My acros are doing really well. I've started mounting them to base rocks instead of frag plugs. So, like a very big dome-shaped frag plug, because my turbo snail really likes to knock them over. And they're kind of expensive, so I'd rather not have a $5 snail kill off a, $50, $60 coral frag. But those are doing good. My calcium was really low recently, I thought, but it was actually because I was, like an idiot, I was using the API calcium test for speed, even though it's not even that much faster than the Salifert one. And that test was off by, it was low by 130 ppm.
Holy crap, that is about 30%. Yeah, it's about 30-40% difference.
Wow. And if you think about how crappy a test has to be off by that much, 33%, especially in a tank where you want the range to be within like 5 to 10% accuracy, that was really bad. So luckily I didn't overcorrect too much. My calcium got up to 460 on the Salifert test, but it was reading like 330, 300 on the API. So yeah, make sure. I think we're going to talk about this today.
Yeah, we are.
But getting the right test kits with a good amount of accuracy and precision is really important, and no longer difficult because the hobby is pretty advanced. So fixed my quote-unquote low calcium issues. My ALK is still really high, but I don't mind because my pH is fine. I think that's about it. I've been selling a lot of Zoas recently. Ooh. People are really into Zoas right now.
It's hard to find good Zoas. It's hard to find good Zoas. You gotta buy them local, like from another seller.
Yeah, because they're either way overpriced or they're wild, and people just say, "Oh, this is a Grandmaster Krakatoa," and it's just an orange,
literal orange,
an orange wild,
literal orange
that they fragged into it. That's a really important thing to note: is if a Zoa has been recently fragged, or if it was reduced to one single head and then sold as one head, the odds of it dying are like astronomically higher than if you just buy even like 4 or 5 Zoas that have had a chance to heal.
Yeah, just give them your money at that point. Don't even take the coral home.
Just put it in a 401k instead. I did want to mention a local event. Oh yeah, June 10th in Anaheim, California. There's a West Coast coral show. So if you're in Southern California, please feel free to drop by. These coral shows are really nice.
Yeah, make sure you stop by Billy and say hi. You're going to be buying or selling there?
Oh, just buying.
Just buying. Do you have a budget?
Selling is too much. No. But I'm only going to buy Alveopora, so I'll probably only spend like $40 because there'll only be one Alveopora in the whole show.
No is like the perfect answer to that question.
Yes.
You have a budget? Oh, when I start to regret it. Oh, man.
I'm agnostic. I don't believe in them. Right. You know, if they show their face, I'll believe in them. But
I have a war with money. We're trying to have the least amount of it at any given time.
Exactly. Right. So that's how my tank's doing, and that's what's coming up locally speaking. I also bought a bunch of flower pots at a local auction, so I'm waiting to pick those up because I don't have enough already. I have like 30 and I need more.
For listeners that don't know, flower pots are a type of coral. He's not buying literal flower pots.
That's a good point. Yeah, there's the main species are Bernardpora, Coniopora, and Alveopora. Out of the three, Alveopora are typically the ugliest, so of course I decided to get addicted to Alveopora.
They're nice. Alveopora have big poofy polyps, though. I like that.
Yeah, yeah, especially when they get older. Yeah. But you have to like green if you're going to get into Alveopora. Otherwise, go to Gauni's because they have the best colors.
Gauni's do have all the crazy colors.
Ooh, there's also a coral show in Phoenix this weekend, according to Kazi, June 3rd, I believe. Yeah, so one weekend before mine. So if you live in the desert and are trying to build a reef for some reason, go to that. Yep. No shade intended.
All right.
Let's get
into the topic.
Topic of the week.
We're going to go through 5 of the best investments you can make for your tank. And this does not just apply to freshwater or saltwater. You could use it in freshwater too, or apply it a little bit to freshwater. But if you're in saltwater, this kind of stuff will save your ass eventually. At one point or another, this will save you. The first one that we have, something that almost every reefer has it after a certain point, because then they realize, hey, why the hell don't I have this? And that is an auto top-off system, ATO.
And that's it. Next one. Just kidding.
No. Okay, so essentially, for people that don't know, everyone that has a tank at some point or another knows that water does evaporate. Even if it's room temp, keep it hot, keep it cold, it will evaporate. And that's not big of a problem in freshwater. In saltwater, the issue is that as water is evaporating, the salt content becomes more and more concentrated. So your salinity goes up until you add fresh water or the water change, which it won't help your salinity skyrocketing that much, but it will lower a little bit. So saltwater people are always constantly topping off their tanks, adding fresh water. And what an auto top off does is it's basically a pump with a sensor. And when it senses that your water in your tank goes down a little bit, it'll pump fresh water from a reservoir into that tank.
Did you ever experiment with analog top off systems versus the digital ones?
Which one's that one? Analog.
Like gravity fed.
No, I've never used gravity fed ever.
What about like those little bottle things with the little gadget on
them? The smallest saltwater tank I've ever had was 35 gallons.
Okay, so that would drain the bottle in maybe 2 or 3 days. Yeah. So what we want to highlight for each of these top 5 investments is that for each of these topics, there is a wide spectrum of money that you can invest. And the more money you invest, you will get diminishing returns, but for a trade-off, right? So the lowest end of the cost spectrum for an ATO, quote-unquote ATO, is literally a water bottle that has 2 tubes sticking out of the cap. And they use some sort of weird pressure witchcraft to top off your water whenever it gets below a certain point. Obviously, that will run out of water really quickly, so it's only recommended for nano tanks, and they're kind of ugly, honestly. So you have to kind of take that into account if you don't want a giant water bottle just sticking out of your tank. Just like one step above that is the gravity fed, which use a little physical piece of plumbing called a float valve that basically just goes down as your water level goes down, and once it gets down below a certain point, it'll open up a tube that's connected to your water, and thanks to gravity, the water will flow down in that tube until it lifts the float valve back up. Reef builders, Jake Adams was a really strong proponent of these just because it's really difficult for them to fail. Yeah. It's less likely that a physical valve is going to plug or malfunction, and it won't bug out because it's completely analog. So that's something to think about, but float valves are also a little bit, well, they're not a little bit, they're very bulky because they need to have a certain amount of air in them to float. So that's usually only recommended for people who have the space for like a relatively large tank of water lifted above their tank or above their sump, and people who have enough space in wherever they're filling to have a float valve and have it not look ugly.
I always go with a float valve. Always. I use a pump. So mine is pump made, but it also goes it goes through a float valve basically once it goes into the sump. Because
so it's a fail-safe.
It is a fail-safe, really. Yeah. I am a big fan of redundancy in a tank, several different layers or several switches that can go off. If one thing goes off, that way, say your float valve doesn't work, well, it's also tied to a pump, which means that it won't overflow either way. Say the pump keeps on going and the sensor that's inside of the sump is failing, because it's sensors. The little float sensors have been known to fail occasionally, and they'll get stuck, especially as time passes and they get corroded or they get some sediment on them. So there's cases where they'll go down and they'll tell your pump or your whatever you're using, hey, the salt level's low, we need some water in here, and it'll constantly keep on thinking that the water's low. So you're probably just gonna keep on pumping and pumping and pumping water into the tank, which does the exact opposite, where that will lower your salinity drastically. One. Two is that it'll flood your sump. So not only are you looking at like the loss of a lot of livestock from drastically lower salinity, but you're also looking at, well, not drastically lower. I guess it really depends on how big your auto top-off container is. But then you're also going to be flooding your floors, and then depending on the floor that you have, that can be a really expensive mistake.
Yeah, it's $100 piece of digital equipment, and if you don't add redundancies, or at least plan around it. I say that, but I don't really have that on mine. My ATO system right now is I don't really know what to call it. It's a garden irrigation pump. So every set number of hours, it'll pump for a set number of seconds from a reservoir. And the reason that works for me is I live in California, where the humidity is relatively stable, meaning it's relatively low all the time. So evaporation is pretty consistent. And I set it to pump for 1 second every 6 hours, and then I measured the salinity while I was setting this tank up. I ramped it up to 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and I kept ramping it up every day until the salinity started staying relatively stable. It works for me. These irrigation pumps are like $30 on AliExpress, and I've had one working and running for 3 years. Or no, sorry. I think up to a year I've had one running, and then I just replace it for posterity's sake. And I never really have to worry. The one thing you have to worry about with these pumps is they're not the best stepper pump motors. They're not like a doser where it's fully fully sealed off when it's not dosing, so it will siphon if you build it wrong.
Ooh.
So the tube should be above the water level, and if it can't be above the water level, your reservoir should be like even. It's hard to explain, but basically just watch out for a siphon if you get one of these.
A good way to do it is to have the water drop in above the water level, because water always coming in above the water level. That's mine's a little different. I have a whole operation going on for my ATO. I have a 45-gallon reservoir, or two 45-gallon reservoir bins in the garage, and one is for mixing salt water, one's for mixing fresh water, and a sensor that tells me when that reservoir is empty. So when that reservoir empties in the garage, the RODI system automatically fills it up all the way to the top, and then it'll empty all the way to the bottom again, and then it automatically turns on all the way to the top. And that actually helps protect the RODI lifespan. But then I have water pumping in from that reservoir into another 5 to 10 gallon reservoir underneath my tank. And then from that reservoir, it finally gets pumped into my sump, into a flow valve with 2 sensors. Yep. So it is fully automated, and I had to do that because of the fact that I was going through around 4 gallons of water a day for evaporation. Especially during the winter, evaporation always is more common when the room temperature is cold. So when I had to constantly keep on filling the reservoir is when I made the realization, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. So I automated the whole process.
So if you want to over-engineer something, talk to Banana.
I love over-engineering.
But he didn't start that way, right? Like, what was your ATO on your first tank? Your 30
my
gallon?
30 gallon. Actually, the 30 gallon. So when I had that giant reservoir, that reservoir actually served as the ATO going into the 30 gallon and into the 80 gallon quarantine system and into the frac tank. So it was a pump that was constantly pushing water, always. And it led to float valve in each tank. So the moment the float valve went down, the water would come in and the float valve would go back up, and it'll cut the water. And that was the process for every single tank. Yeah.
Wow.
My old that it was again. You're right though. It wasn't always like that. The old ATO. My reservoir used to be, those 5-gallon jugs that people use in offices for the water jugs that they'll refill and whatnot. Yeah, I got one of those, and that used to be my reservoir. Every like 2 or 3 days, I would drag my bucket of RODI water there, fill it, and then put my RODI water bucket, drag it back into the laundry or wherever the RODI system was.
Okay, hear me out. You buy a used water cooler station and you plumb it into a float valve, and that way you can replace the water bin with like the same way you would replace a water cooler.
I don't know what a water cooler is. What's a water cooler?
You know
What's
what a water cooler is? If you were white, you would know
Oh
this.
my god, what's a water
cooler? White culture. It's the ones that have that same blue like 5-gallon tub thing.
Oh,
but you put them upside down.
Okay.
I'm making a dumb joke because there would be no reason for you to flip it upside down because gravity is.
Basically,
anyway,
that's overcomplicated. Just ignore everything I said about my system. All you need is a small pump inside the reservoir. A reservoir is something that holds fresh water, so you don't need to carry water back and forth. The whole point of an auto top is so that your salinity stays constant and it's not wavering up and down. Because obviously, salinity over the course of a day, you'll have evaporation. Salinity goes up to like what, 1.026, 1.027, 28, and then boom, out of nowhere, you're bringing it back down to 0.5. And then a few days later, it slowly climbs up again, 1.026, 1.027, 1.028, and then boom, you're lowering it again. So the whole point is to avoid that swing in salinity, or that swing where the salt gets more concentrated, by constantly adding the water as it gets evaporated. That's essentially the whole point of an auto top off.
One note to make is you don't have to worry about this when you're first starting your tank, because salinity swings are fine while you're cycling, to a certain degree, of course. But while it's cycling, you should try to figure out what your evaporation rate is and start engineering a solution that's either as automated as you can get it, like if you get frustrated with the top offs like Banana did, or just simple and hopefully fail proof like mine. So you have time. Even once you have fish, they can take a relatively big swing in salinity pretty easily because rain exists in the reefs. So when it rains, obviously salinity will get a little screwy for a bit. But yeah, these are solutions that you build up over time. And once you know the right solution for your reef tank, you can start either saving up or building that investment. Okay.
Oh, that was a lot.
That was a lot to talk about, but it's a very big subject, and obviously Banana has some really cool engineering behind his. Definitely recommend you copy his if you can. Number 2 on our list is some kind of controller. So this is an extreme example of how you can spend $5 or $500 on an investment in your reef tank, and it'll still be beneficial no matter how much you spend. The spectrum here is the smallest investment you can make is in a smart plug, which are usually like $5 to $10 each, or a smart
dedicated controller.
Power strip. Yeah. Oh yeah, or a smart like a power controller, like a power strip. There's Wi-Fi, like Bluetooth enabled power strips now because we're in the future, and it spans all the way up to the quote unquote reef controllers, which have a bunch of probes connected to them. There's a computer controlling everything. You can view the console on your web browser or on your phone through an app. And it also connects to its own version of the smart power strip, but with a lot more controllability. I use smart plugs on most of my tech on my reef tank. I think like maybe half of the things that I have plugged into my reef tank are also plugged into a smart plug. It's all labeled, and a lot of the budget lights that you're going to buy won't have their own schedule, or it'll be really annoying to set up the schedule, and you won't be able to access them from the web unless you have a really expensive controller. I have maybe 50% of my stuff plugged into smart plugs, individual ones, and I have all my lights on 1 or 2 of them. Be careful if you do that, because lights have a certain amount of power they need, and if you're pulling everything through a single smart plug, that plug might not be rated for the voltage or the wattage that you're pulling.
That's a big one, yeah.
But I do that because I did the math. So all of my stuff is scheduled and coordinated and controlled. Even I have all my return pumps, like my return pump, my wave maker, all of my turbulence on smart plugs, not on the same one, but I can turn them off individually if I need to do maintenance or if I need to keep them off for 30 minutes to do a feeding, like especially a coral feeding. You don't want to have too much flow. These are a really good, smart, small investment that you can make in your reef tank that gives you so much control over what's happening in your ecosystem.
I mean, cool ones too now that like Alexa makes some. No, Amazon makes some controllers. Yeah, smart switches. Amazon makes some smart switches or smart outlets that you can control with the Alexa. So it can be like Alexa activate feed mode, and then your Alexa will send the signal to the controllers that will then turn off certain pumps or whatnot.
Oh yeah. And those can be controlled through Alexa. They can be controlled through Google Home, Apple Home, etc. All those different Internet of Things apps that are out there nowadays.
What about temp controllers?
Yes, that is another type of controller that's really important, and those are in the low to medium end of the spectrum too. Basically, it serves as a redundancy for your heater, and for most people in most parts of the world that aren't California, temperature is the most important ecological aspect of your reef tank. Really important to know that your temperature is in a safe range and know that what's reporting your temperature is doing so accurately. So if you buy like a $3 sticky thermometer that goes on the outside of your glass, that's not a dependable source.
Yeah.
So you have to be really careful. But the one I use is an Inkbird. They're pretty popular, and I think Bulk Reef Supply has their own generic version of it as well. It's a little computer connected to two thermometers, two temperature probes, and two power outlets. And basically, it says, okay, if it basically acts as a shell, it removes power from your heaters if the temperature ranges it detects are above the range, and if it starts getting below the range that you want to set it in, it'll turn your heaters back up.
They're pretty cool. They're really cool. A lot of people now use controllers. Back in the day, and like, well, a lot of beginners do this now too, but they'll use a glass thermometer, no, a glass heater. Yeah, they use glass heaters. And once you phase out of that, you start realizing that those things are very prone to failing, and they have a high risk of having moisture getting inside of them and damaging the heaters. And we'll go more about heating and heating elements in another episode, but it's very, very nice to have a controller on the side that tells you, hey, something's wrong with the tank. Your temperature is 5 degrees below where it should be, or hey, your tank is way hotter than it should be. Now the controller will automatically turn. So the way it works is they'll turn on the heater when it reaches like 2 degrees below where it should be, and then they'll turn it off where it reaches a certain point. That'll keep your tank temperature stable.
It also helps for some of these digital temperature switches that are inside these very cheaply made heaters. If they're turning off and on every time it goes 0.1 degrees above or 0.1 degrees below the temperature you set it to, usually inaccurate, by the way, because those little turn dials on the heaters are rarely actually accurate.
Oh yeah.
But that component of the little heater wears down over time. Like certain things can only stand so many on and off cycles, just like a battery, I guess.
Anything really.
So what the controller ends up doing is it shields that sensitive piece of hardware from having to even be on, like giving it access to power until it knows it's within a certain amount of range. And more importantly, if that piece of hardware breaks and it fails on and the heater is pulling power no matter what the temperature is, the controller will detect that. It goes up to 81 or 82 or whatever and just completely deny power to that heater.
There's a wide range of these too. I made my own back when I had my BioCube. I soldered and wired my own controller, and it had 2 outlets. And the way that I had it set up was that fans would turn on if it hit above a certain temp, and then fans would turn on if it hit below. And if it sensed that there was a discrepancy too high, it would send me an email, which wasn't really worth it at the time because I never checked my email. I'm still really bad at checking my email, but basically, yeah. Just make sure that if you do get a controller, that it is rated for water. and more specifically saltwater, because certain probes will corrode and they will rust a lot more rapidly in salt than in freshwater.
Same is true for the heaters. Like the lifespan of a heater in saltwater, especially if it's glass, is much lower. Yep. If you can't afford a controller right now, just make sure you're auditing the lifespan or the total operating time of your heater at home and replacing them as you get to whatever time range is protected in the warranties, because the warranties are usually a good indicator of, oh, this is how long this heater was designed to last. And you'll often find that that duration, that durability is a lot lower than you would expect from a heater. So just be careful.
Yep.
All right. Lots of different ways you can control and audit and test your reef tank with digital stuff, but analog testing is a really good way to go for individual parameters in your tank.
Yeah, so for number 3 in our top 5 investments, we had 1 was in now the top off, 2 was a controller of some kind. The third one is a proper test kit. I cannot stress this enough. If you're running a saltwater tank or one of those heavier freshwater tanks, it is more than necessary to have a solid test kit that you can rely on and give you, if not the most accurate, at least precise measurements consistently. I can't tell you how many times we've asked people what the parameters are, and they're like, "Oh, my taste test." There's so many different tests, and the moment you hear, like, you can tell, and this is biased, I don't want to sound mean, but you can kind of tell how experienced somebody is based off of what test kit they're using. Test strips are like the bare minimum of when it comes to testing water. Then,
which sucks so fast. Like I they could be accurate. I wish I could love using them.
Yeah, they're very, very fast. We use them for pools, but you're better off just tasting the water at that point. You will get more accurate readings doing a taste test than using test strips. I'm not attacking anybody. I'm just stating. Test strips are...
Well, we're attacking the companies that market these test strips as if
they are not accurate. They are not accurate. And then the next, on the very lowest tier, lowest, I mean low. Odds are, if someone's using test strips, they're probably going to be using this as well. But that's API. API is one of the most inaccurate and imprecise ways of testing. And actually, Billy, do you know what company owns API?
No, I think they're their own company.
No, API, Aquarium Pharmaceuticals Incorporated, is owned by Mars, a candy bar, the same company that makes candy, the same company that makes a lot of dog and cat foods.
Well, everyone's owned by someone.
Everyone, well, yeah, but especially in saltwater, like, I know now, for example, you have companies like Ecotech, Apex, and Boca Resupply that are all that are owned by the same company. I think AI is in that too. They're all by the same company, but each one still specializes in one thing. I just think it's funny that API is owned by the same company that makes chocolate is the one that makes the very test kits that a lot of people rely the tanks on.
Well, it's different. Again, it's funny to learn that, but it doesn't affect.
No, it doesn't affect it. But I don't know. I personally think that API is extremely inconsistent.
Oh yeah, no,
extremely
I agree.
Inconsistent.
It's not because they're owned by a candy company, but you think a candy company would be able to do at least a little bit of chemistry, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this chocolate has proper calcium levels. It is good to go.
Namely zero. Zero. So we're starting from the bottom of the barrel, which is test kits, and only marginally above that, which is sad because the bar is low, is API test kits. If you have API test kits already, things to keep in mind for utility on a reef tank is the calcium seems to be very inaccurate. Alkalinity seems to be fine, like DKH. They sell like a DKH and GH test kit, mostly for shrimp, but it has an alkalinity test and it seems to be accurate, but I would still go with Salifert over anything. Ammonia API test is in saltwater. It is so foggy you can't even tell what the result is 99% of the time. So you just have to kind of guess, which is absolutely tragic because ammonia is incredibly important to keep at zero. And if it's anything above zero and you guessed that it wasn't, your tank is just dead. nitrite and nitrate are kind of non-factors, especially for beginners, so you don't really have to worry about those.
Oh, but when you do though, yeah. By the time you're testing, hopefully you move past the API.
But if you're cycling, your own tank, bring your water to a fish store and have them test it. And if they use API to test your water, leave and never come back.
Actually, I tested my alkalinity with the API a few times, and I don't know if the one that I specifically got was off, but it was like 23, 24.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's probably not accurate.
No, definitely not. It was off.
Yeah, and if you do have the test kits already, make sure you at least follow the instructions, because their inaccuracy only gets more drastic if you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, you've got to hold the bottle perfectly upwards. It's got to be perfectly perpendicular to sea level, and then you need to make sure you shake it 4 times. Then a quick prayer to the Queen of Jupiter, and then then you're finally ready to drop.
So if you guys have further questions or further curiosities about which test kits are ideal, our server has what I call a parameters Bible, which is just the bare minimum of what you need to keep a reef tank, and it sorts them by priority. So you only have to worry about 3 parameters when you first start your first tank, and then you have to go down from there, or you have to expand from there, adding more parameters as you add different organisms to your tank. And with each parameter, along with a prioritization, is an ideal test kit and a budget test kit.
None of the budget ones are API.
I think I did it for DKH, but I'm going to change that now that you've told me about how inaccurate it was.
Well, that was just my experience. I know there's certain different ones that are out there. There's a certain test kit, for example, where I have tried several different reagents, and I spent up one because I had like 3 bottles of it. I ordered from Book Resupply. It sent me 3 of this brand for magnesium, and I'm not gonna say what brand it was, but it's the name of an ocean. Is it an ocean? I think it's an ocean. Anyways, I spent the 4 hours, and this is the most irritating thing ever. I spent 4 hours testing the same thing amongst 3 different bottles of reagent, and I was getting ranging from 1,200 all the way to 1,600.
And the thing that sucks is it's not an easy job to make a test kit that is accurate and precise and affordable.
It's not.
Like, those are 3 things that are impossible to find. But the bar has dropped so low past that it's ended up making the hobby a lot more difficult unnecessarily. So yeah, keep things simple. If you're going to buy a test kit, buy the right one the first time, and check our parameters Bible to figure out what that is.
If you're keeping coral, like $40 of the coral versus a $40 test kit doesn't sound like that much when you start keeping hundreds of dollars worth of coral. When you look at your entire tank as a whole, you realize that you have spent several $100s on your tank over the course of like the last year or so. A $40 test kit or pack of test kits doesn't seem that extreme. You know what I mean?
And if you have the budget for it, an ICP test every 6 months or so
every week
will help you not only help you calibrate like how accurate your test kits are, but just test things that you wouldn't possibly ever want to buy a test kit for. So you could buy the cost of individual test kits for each of the things that an ICP tests for would be like $800. So the math works out. Do you do ICP tests often, Banana?
I ICP test once every few months. I tried doing the Moonshiners program that required ICP testing once a month, and then I realized I was very, very bad at keeping up with that. So now I ICP test once every few months.
Yeah, that was the Triton method, right?
No. Moonshiners is different. We can go over that on the side, but it's a dosing regimen. I kind of now do a mix between that and just water changes.
I think Triton was based on Moonshiners or something. Then they just tried to over monetize.
Sort of, yeah. They capitalized on it. No, Moonshiners is more recent, I think. Triton's another one. Yeah. I think they did try to.
We'll talk about it in a future episode. Okay, that's number 3. Again, remember to join our server if you have any questions about parameters. Number 4 is Wavemaker. I added this one. It's kind of reductive, but even in a fish only tank, adding even just a little bit of flow, especially turbulent indirect flow, is so beneficial for not only your oxygen exchange, but the health of the fish, the buildup of algae and unwanted detritus. These things are really awesome. the only issue I have with this entry is it's really difficult to get a good, affordable wave maker for like a really small tank. Like they only go so small in the sizing to the point where I think if you have under like a 15-gallon tank, it's really difficult to get a wave maker that won't just either turbo blast your sand or just be like a tiny little jet of water that won't do anything. But for any tank above that, the Higer Nano wave makers is a really good budget option. I bought one when I first started my reef tank like almost 3 years ago now, or no, just over 2 actually. I'm losing track of when I started my tank. I'm getting old. And it was for an 8-gallon. It was way too big, but it still added a lot of flow to my tank. That made it a lot more interesting. It turned it into a little snow globe every once in a while, which was cute. I feel like there would be a really easy way to DIY a nano, like a Pico wave maker for tanks under 15 gallons. But for everyone else, a Higer is great. Even if you just need to get like a power head for a larger tank, if you don't have the budget for a Higer yet, that's fine. Because if you point it in the right direction, it will dramatically improve the health of your fish, or at least the livelihood of your fish, and the health of your corals.
Yeah, good flow is really important in a tank. Good flow is really, really important. It will make you're talking about simulating an environment where just ocean currents are insane. You've got really fast currents going through coral, and these coral colonies are growing huge. You've got fish that are used to actual moving water, even like the smallest crevices of the ocean. You're still going to have move in the water of some sort. Good flow is absolutely important in a tank, and a wave maker goes a long way to making that happen.
Yeah, very true. Anytime I add clownfish to a tank, they go immediately to the most ridiculously high flow area in the tank, and they just thrive there.
Yeah.
Like it looks like they're struggling.
They love it. They love it. They love the movement. NEMs will move to areas that have higher flow if they're stuck in areas with lower flow. And then I realized in my tank, at least, I was having issues where I was losing coral torch colonies in areas that had low flow. But as soon as I started raising that or put them in higher flow areas, it got better. They started getting better. I was losing less torches.
Yeah, we can do a whole episode on flow, but basically in lower flow areas, algae will build up, especially the less desirable ones. Detritus will build up and then fuel that algae exponentially. And corals will basically starve or poison themselves because they use the water flow and to do nutrient exchange. So they pull in beneficial nutrients and they export excess negative nutrients, dead cells, bacteria, stuff like that. Yep, super easy topic. What would you say is the smallest wave maker or like water mover you've ever had?
Smallest?
Budget wise?
I don't even know. They're so. AquaClear makes these really, really affordable wave makers. They're very, very small budget. They're very, very low budget. And they're very, very small. Yeah, these power heads. There's a wide range of brands of wave makers though. And it's really cool because you can either get the $800 Vortec or the $500 Waves, or you can get a similar brand that does have the same amount of flow. Can we say the brand? It's Jebel. Screw it, Jebel. Jebel is like the all-around brand for most of the electrical equipment you can see. They've got return pumps, they've got wave makers, they've got gyres, and you're not going to get the highest, craziest settings with them, but they're very, very useful.
Not right now. Oh, I have a Jabao doser just because the five-headed one was super affordable. But I only used 2 heads. But it was the same price to buy a 5-head of Jabao than to buy a 1-head of Kamor. And these are just random brands that were spouting out. I think the closest I got to like a really tiny budget net wave maker was those like $5 pumps that you can get on like the tech sites, like the hacker tinkerer sites, and I connected it to a sine wave power controller. So it was basically turning on and off, or like turning up and down the flow rate of the pump every 2 seconds or so, and it broke almost immediately because it's a $5 pump. But you could probably scale that up a little bit, use better equipment, make sure it's a DC pump, I think, because those can handle the fluctuation in power.
The last one on the list. So far, we've got auto top off, a controller, a good test kit, and the wave maker. And the very last one to run it all off and tie back to the first one is an RODI system. RODI, I will stand behind it. An RODI system is an amazing investment for a reef tank, no matter the size. And you can find them all over.
Would you say that a good LFS that sells roadie water is an adequate replacement, or no?
I want to say yes, but that implies that an LFS is very, very finicky with her water. I have heard and seen LFS that don't maintain the water that they give out to other people to the same, quality or standard of their own water. And I've heard a story I have a story of a friend local to me who used LFS water consistently, and his tank wasn't doing well. He wouldn't know what was wrong, and he got the pre-mixed salt water. And he realized that the TDS of the water that he was getting was around 140.
Which is tap water.
Yeah, it's basically tap water. So yeah, if you have a very, very, very reputable LFS, that's you're 100% getting the good stuff, go with it. Otherwise, I mean, you're gonna risk your tank over an RODI system. And if you have fish only, it's not that big of a deal. But if you're keeping coral or inverts, it's definitely better to just buy an RODI than risk what you're getting.
Very true. What I would do if I was getting it from an LFS is, like Banana mentioned, trust but verify, and get your own TDS meter and find a way. But again, a TDS meter is going to cost you about half as much as it would cost to just buy a new roadie.
Exactly. TDS meters are
when we say TDS, by the way, we mean anything that is not H2O.
So what TDS stands for total dissolved solid, and yeah, like Billy said, it measures all the stuff that's dissolved in the water. And the whole point of an RODI system is to filter that out through a membrane, through carbon, through resin or deionization resin, which pulls the metals and absorbs it into little beads. The entire point of an RODI system is meant to work as something that pulls the metals and gives you nothing but pure deionized water.
Yep, and there's a whole lot of chemistry behind that.
There's a lot.
But that is long and short of it. And basically, anytime you put non-zero TDS water into your tank, you're adding and you're accumulating things that will eventually build up to toxic levels and give you issues with your corals.
It will. And algae issues too. A lot of people get algae issues from store-bought water or from high TDS. Metals, silicates that are feeding everything.
Yeah, because they'll come in and iron too.
Iron's a good one. Houses.
And basically, another thing to think about is if you don't use roadie water on your tank, if you're using tap water and you're having any issue with your tank, there's so many things that could be in your water that we can't test for. And we could very likely be the cause of your issue, but we're not going to be able to diagnose that unless you spend $75 on an ICP test.
That's usually one of the first ones on the troubleshooting list. Like, what water do you use? And then if you hear tap water, that's the one. That's it.
One thing I will comment on is most of the companies that are pushing roadie filter systems are the ones that sell them. So they have an axe to grind in kind of scaring you about all these unknown TDSs. But they do have a point. It does make.
That's us right now. We're pushing by the banana label RODI systems coming.
Oh yeah. We're happy to announce
we filter the water ourselves. We're process of evaporation. But yeah, and I'm not saying spend $500 to $600 on the latest and hottest RODI system. What I did, I got lucky actually. I caught my RODI system back when an old company called Marine Depot was shutting down. And I paid around $75 for mine. My currently, right, what I did was pay $75 for mine, and I looked online, and I found a RODI system being sold for another $75. And each one was 4 membranes or 4 units. So I rewired it, or not rewired it, but I retubed it to make one big RODI 7-stage, and when I looked it up, it's the equivalent of getting a 9-stage $875 RODI for $150. In the end, it's all containers. It's all just canisters, and as long as you can, I don't want to say to a plummet. As long as you plummet properly, you're getting the exact same thing that the high-end ones are selling.
And again, test it and have redundancy on your test.
Redundancy all the way through. I have 2 sensors on mine. Do you make your own water or do you buy it?
I make my own. I just made a new batch, and I can actually get it down to 0 TDS, as verified by 2 different TDS meters.
I love my RDS,
and it is very nice. I actually use that same water to make tea, and it makes really really good tea. People use it for coffee. I wouldn't recommend you do it in I wouldn't recommend you like drink it normally, because it is pure water. Your body is not typically accustomed to drinking pure H2O. Some sort of minerals and hardness in it, but it makes really good like brewed beverages.
And you can use the the fall off, the waste from your RDI water to water your plants, to do whatever you want with it. I wouldn't recommend you drink it, of course, because it's very very concentrated wastewater. Plants love it.
It's what plants crave. It's the equivalent of using water change water from your tank.
Yeah.
To water your plants. Okay, that's our main topics. We do have a few honorable mentions, but we're not going to spend too much time on those. That we can save those for another episode.
Yeah, my first one is an auto feeder. It's always good to have an auto feeder. And if you can't consistently be at your tank to feed your fish, it's good to have something that will feed it for you. Just make sure your auto feeder is stopped off, and your fish will be. They'll thank you for it. If you pair an auto feeder with a controller, so you can have your return pump turn off and your waves turn off, your wave makers turn off, while the tank feeds. It's like it works wonders.
Yeah, very true. Especially important to have your return pump off, because the number of pellets I've seen just like float along over to my overflow and then vanish without being eaten, to either be skimmed or eaten by the brittle star I have in my sump. It's a lot of wasted nutrients. So I've started actually turning it off, and I highly recommend.
And then, what do you got?
Oh, I only have a couple. Reactors in general are a really good purchase, but there's so many different ways you could buy it or build it. So I left that off of the main list. What I have right now is just a standard CJ pump pushing water very slowly through activated carbon, Chemipure. So like one of those. It's not just activated carbon; it's a bunch of resins and GFO because it's the Chemipure Elite.
Yeah.
And then it also goes through a Cuprosorb, which is a metal absorbing resin. I have had issues with metal buildup in my tank in the past, so it's really soothing to just have a constant export of anything that was remaining and anything that does build up when I screw up again, because I will screw up again. And it just helps. It's really, really nice. I usually use a little bit of polyfilter in there too, because apparently that absorbs a bunch of random stuff, but I haven't seen any actual results from that. Have you ever used polyfill?
I have not used polyfill, actually.
All right, polyfill is different from polyfilter. Have you used polyfilter, like the?
I have not. Nope.
Okay. Well, yeah, we'll talk about that soon. And like I mentioned before, a temp controller is just really nice to have.
Yeah. My last honorable mention is something that a lot of people don't think about, but a live web camera for your reef tank or for your tank. It doesn't have to be a $500, elite security system. A $20 Wise camera or one of those like baby cameras going towards your tank is a huge observation, especially if you're going on vacation. It's a huge help. Being able to check on your tank whenever you want, being able to, see if something's going on. Obviously, if you don't have anyone to come over and deal with it, it doesn't help much. But if you're like on the other side of the country and you have a camera going towards your tank and you check on it whenever you want, it's just peace of mind that will tell you when something's leaking or flooding. It's a huge one. I think so, at least.
No, I totally agree. Most of the issues that will arise in your tank, once you get experience enough, you can kind of spot just visually.
Yeah.
And if you're not there to look at your tank, another thing that you could potentially do with that webcam is just watch, like when you're on vacation, watch whoever you ask to feed your tank to see if they're doing it wrong. The number of tank crashes I've heard about from people who just asked their significant other to feed the tank one time, and they dumped the entire bottle of fish food, the box of bacteria, and then like 20 different tablets of frozen food.
Jeez, that's my nightmare. I always tell somebody handy to take care of your stuff. We have an episode coming up later though. That's like vacation prep for a tank.
Ooh, yeah. Okay, so those are our honorable mentions. We'll probably bring them up again in a future episode. But for now, we're going to go to the Q&A section. So thank you guys for all the questions you've asked. Okay, so basically, I Ate a Banana asks, well, first of all, great name. What are some tips for Nemos, LOL? Clownfish are so popular and so easy to captive breed. Well, quote unquote easy to captive breed. There's a lot of companies doing it, that they should be relatively easy, even for someone who's like kind of a beginner in even freshwater.
They are fairly common.
They're common. They come in pretty healthy because they're captive bred, and there's some really, really cool patterns now. don't go in looking just for a Nemo because there's so many different types of clownfish. Not even like some of them aren't even the standard orange one. Just look up clownfish species and captive bred designer clownfish designs, and you'll see all the incredible range of designs that are out there. But the care requirements are all the same. They just need probably like a 15 to 20 gallon for a pair, or I guess you can do a solo one in a 10 gallon, but what's the point of that? Make sure it eats in the store, and make sure your tank is cycled before you put them in. So basically, you need like 2 to 3 weeks of lead time before you buy the clownfish. And those 2 to 3 weeks are you putting salt water in a tank, just filling it up, adding beneficial bacteria and ideally an ammonia source so you can get that cycle started. Live rock helps as well. And over those 2 to 3 weeks, while you're testing your ammonia to see if it goes down, practice maintaining the salinity of your tank. Test your results against multiple LFSs just to figure out whether or not your salinity measurement is accurate. And then you're ready. Reiterating that you should make sure they eat in the store because that's a really important red flag to test for. If your LFS won't feed them in the store, they're selling you sick fish.
Basically, they should always feed them. Always feed them.
Yep, and that's it. Another thing to think about is they do really like anemones, but anemones are much more advanced to take care of than the clownfish themselves. But clownfish are a little dumb, so you can buy a fake plastic anemone for like $15 on Amazon, show them videos of other clownfish hosting anemones on YouTube, and they'll host it after a while. You have to show it a bunch of times, but they'll eventually figure out like, hey, this kind of looks like what's in that video.
I love seeing the relationship between clownfish and nems. It's so cool. It's something that you very rarely get to see in aquariums or like home life. But seeing clownfish pick food that's falling and take it into the mouth of the nem, or I actually got a picture of it the other day, seeing clownfish sucking on the nem and like puffing it up, or if it was growing in ways that they didn't like it, clownfish will take the nem and they'll bite it down. It's weird. They put the entire nem in their mouth and they kind of push it back to the base. And then they just let it fill up again. It's really, really funny to watch.
There's a really cool video I have to show you. I've never witnessed them actually giving food to the anemone.
Really?
Is that a thing?
That's happened a lot. Whenever I feed larger crow, especially, whenever I feed larger frozen mysis, they'll take the mysis and they will feed it to the nem. Or take it to the mouth of the nem.
I didn't know that was a thing.
They're really cool. Clownfish are a lot smarter than you give them credit for. Yeah, they're a lot smarter than you give them credit for.
They're smart at certain things, and they're dumb in the rest.
They are, especially in the wild. If you ever see videos of clownfish moving shells and moving like rocks over, flipping rocks, moving them towards their area to make a nest, clowns are smart. There's a lot of respect that comes to them. It's pretty cool. I need to warn you though, and like we should have a disclaimer that if you go down this path to try to keep clownfish, you are opening a door to a very enjoyable but addictive hobby. It's a whole world. It's a whole world. No regrets getting into it though. I love this hobby. It is like Pandora's box.
The next question: what is your favorite crustacean? I recently discovered the Peterson's cleaner fish or cleaner shrimp. It's like a skunk cleaner shrimp, but it's completely transparent with like blue accents. Kind of obsessed with that one, but I can't find it anywhere, so I don't have one yet.
My favorite is the mantis shrimp. They are the coolest fish crustacean out there, and just in terms of biology, like they are incredibly badass when you think about it. Like the ability to punch strong enough that the water immediately boils, like the friction from the punch immediately boils the water molecules around it and creates a little bubble of air, and it does hit with the impact of a small 9mm.
No, it's not air. It's a vacuum.
So vacuum creates a vacuum of air. They're not a vacuum of air because they're just made of stuff. It creates a vacuum. It basically an absence of all molecules in that little
vacuum of air.
Vacuum of air. It's a vacuum. Another really cool thing about them is that, like, as humans, we are only able to biologically, visually process 3 different kinds of light. 3 different kinds of color, and that's red, green, and blue. Every other thing that we see is just an aspect of those things mixed together. Mantis shrimp can see 12. It's crazy when you think about it. Imagine seeing a color that you couldn't even think, like you can't imagine the color you can't imagine, and then do that 12 times over, and that is what a mantis shrimp can see.
Yeah, scientifically they're really awesome. Evolutionarily they're really awesome, but they also just really look cool. you do kind of have to be careful if you add them to an existing tank because they do murder most things they can
I know
reach.
that I can't keep one of these, but I don't know. It's cool. Like, dude, they can see colors that you can't see. Like, imagine a color you can't imagine, right? And I'm just meaning colorblind sense. It's colors that you physically cannot imagine.
Well, we could probably describe them scientifically.
Describe a color.
I don't think anyone's done it yet, so you should do it. All right. That's our favorite crustacean. Next question, also from Kazi. What's a cool tiny invert that will eat mudded isopods?
Inverts. I don't know about inverts. Fish. There's plenty of fish that'll eat them. I don't know about inverts though. Most inverts are very rarely eating other inverts. You can try shrimp. No, camel shrimp won't eat them.
Yeah, well, you don't really need something to eat muddids because they're harmless.
They are. They're good food though for your wrasses. They're good food for your other fish. I don't have any in my tank. I know I have them in my tank, but again, because of the fish that I have, I don't have any in my tank.
Yeah, I think fish are more likely to be predators for microcrustaceans like
that.
I'm sure hermit crabs will eat them, but you probably won't see it because it's a tiny thing eating a tinier thing.
And they're fast compared to how fast hermit crabs are. They're most likely to get away. The papaya asked, "What is the best urchin hat?" I like the sombrero. That's mine. Have
you ever seen them holding the molted shell of an emerald crab?
No, I haven't. I have not actually. I've seen them holding a clam though.
Ooh. Oh, that's cute. I mean, it's sad if they got a clam shell. Was it like a Durasa clam, like a tiny Durasa?
Yeah, it was a little clam shell. It was walking around on top of it. People have recently, in the last few years, started printing urchin hats. And my favorite one is a sombrero.
Yeah, I agree. Amongst the 3D printed ones, probably a sombrero. Or you could do like, there's a lot of, I need to think about that more. Someone, Kazi sent a picture of an urchin that stole a whole feather duster.
Urchins are thieves, man. Urchins are thieves.
Mine has a growing out colony of utter chaos zoas or pallies. So it's one of the prettiest things in the tank because I don't even know how he got them, but he got them to detach somehow and he stole them.
That's really cool. Mine picks those sponges, zoas, frags, whatever he can get his hands on. They'll pick up whatever. But I think it's a form of self-defense.
Oh yeah, it's probably like an accidental thing that also ends up being self-defense. For those of you who don't know, urchins have like millions of tiny little tubes that they use to pick up food and stuff. But the tubes that are closer to the top of them are really far from the mouth. So instead of picking up food, because they typically won't find stuff free floating in the water column, they will pick up clams and shells and little rocks and stuff, and they'll pull them all the way in and basically use them as a shield. So not only do they have a row of spiky poison spines, on top of that they have a clamshell or like literal rocks, or in this case a feather duster. I
saw an urchin one time. You know the little Android logo with the little robot? I saw one holding the top half. They printed out the head of the robot, and it was just walking around with the 2 dots on the sides. It was gorgeous. It was so pretty. Pretty funny. It's pretty funny.
Another question from So Basically I Ate a Banana. What about some dories? I kind of answered this in chat already. We're going to do a whole episode on Finding Nemo and what they got right and what they got wrong, but I would not recommend the dory fish is the blue hippo tang or the regal tang, I believe.
Yep.
Not only are they really tricky to get in healthy, but they can kind of be jerks once they get settled in. So if you wanted to recreate like the Finding Nemo biotope of sorts, I would get just a normal clownfish are fine. Nemos are really easy, like I mentioned, and a yellowtail damsel because that's the closest thing I've found to an actual dory that doesn't turn into a serial killer. Since the damsel, you would have to worry about aggression later on, so I would put them in probably a 30-gallon tank minimum if you're gonna try to build out that biotope. All right, that's all the questions we have. Thank you all for throwing stuff in there.
You'll see this podcast posted live on Friday. But we do have other ones recorded, so it'll be Friday in like 3 weeks' time.
Yeah, we have a backlog.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you guys. Hope to see you guys next week. We'll be here Tuesday again.
Thanks for listening to episode 4 of Slice of the Reef podcast. Bye, everyone. Thank you for listening to another episode of Slice of the Reef,
your number one podcast for all things fishy, with your hosts, Giancarlo and Billy. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else that podcasts are held. That way, you'll never miss an episode. If you want to be a part of our podcast, join us on discord.xyz/Slice of the Reef, where we'll be recording in front of a live audience. We also give you a moment at the end of every episode for a live Q&A session, and we're very interactive with our fans. So we'd love for you to join. You can also check out our website for articles, guides, calculators, and information on our upcoming episodes at sliceofthereef.org. Hope to see you guys soon.
Farewell and easy reefing.